Hello, hello. How are you guys today? Welcome to the Year I Made It podcast. My name is Madison, and thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode. This episode, I wanted to share a little bit about just an experience that I had when I was traveling lately that made me just ponder and reflect on how I choose to spend my money and my time, and just some interesting perspectives that I stumbled upon. And I really wanted to just share those with you guys. So, this episode is going to be talking about material possessions versus experience and kind of how we spend our time and our money. And so, a couple weeks ago, I went on a trip to Arizona. So I fly into Phoenix and I am in the Phoenix airport. And so I'm sitting at the bag check waiting for my bag to come down. And so me and this other guy, we're kind of playing like the bag game, where like you're trying to see like when the bags come off, which way they're gonna go, so that way you can like be there, like grab your bag when it comes off. So we're playing this game. And then there's this other guy that has on like, so me and this guy, you can tell we're dressed in like comfy travel fits. Like we've got like our book bags, like we're like, you can tell like we're like, we got our travel fits on, right? And there's this other guy that's got on this very fancy fit, not great for a 6-hour flight, but to each his own, maybe he had a reason. So me and travel fit guy, we're playing this game of like which way the bag is gonna come out. And so him and fancy dress guy get to talking, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm really just always trying to make sure, I'm on the right side so I get my bag when it comes down. And so I always like kind of like play this game with myself, am I going to be on the right side? And so fancy dress guy, he's like, yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, I don't ever travel enough to like know. And the other guy's like, oh yeah, I'm a big like buy last minute cheap plane tickets, like love to travel. And I'm not in this conversation. Like I cannot stress this enough. Like I am at no point involved in this conversation. I'm just eavesdropping, so our bags are taking a long time to come out. And so this guy is like talking about how he just like buys like cheap plane tickets to wherever, like loves to travel. I'm like, samesies, dude. This is me to me in my mind. And so the other guy who doesn't know about which way the bags come out game, he's like, oh yeah, I don't like, really like to spend my money, traveling. I just, like there's like a lot of boots I like, and my boots when they come out, they cost like at least $300. And, always got to make sure I have the latest pair. And the other guy who's a travel fit guy, you can tell he's just like, yeah, can't relate, never bought a pair of $300 boots, which is what I'm thinking in my mind, which is like, can't relate, never spent $300 on any material possession. On a plane ticket all day long, material possession, So they end up having just like this really odd conversation about how the one guy is trying to brag about all these like material possessions that he has, the other guy can't relate. And he's like, oh yeah, I just, kind of like travel. I don't really have like a lot of like, like the guy's trying to like name drop brands he buys and different things like that. And the other guy, like you can tell he can't relate. He's just trying to figure out, am I on the right side for my bag to come out? And it was such an interesting conversation for me to listen into, because I was like, wow, there is this concept of money, which obviously we all know money incredibly important to live, but I have kind of adopted this new thought pattern around money, that money, like spending money is spending your time. So essentially like you have to give your time to work to make money. So every time you spend money, you're essentially spending hours of your life that you gave to make that money, and just thinking about spending it wisely. And a big way that I've learned that lesson recently is through material things. And really kind of, I would say I've never been a big material things person. I like to have nice things, but I only buy them if they're on sale, right? So lately I have been buying less material things and just kind of spending more money on experiences. And so it used to be like, I would be like, okay, going on a vacation, but I gotta buy like all new fits for like this new vacation that I'm going on. And it was so funny because as I was standing there listening to this conversation, I was like reflecting on like, man, like me like 5 years ago would have bought like all these unnecessary outfits I would have worn one time on this vacation, and then they would have sat in my closet for 5 years until I donated them. And new me was just like, bitch, you got plenty of clothes, put them in the suitcase, let's go. And then I spent my money on activities while I was there instead of fits that I was wearing. And so I think that is just one, so it was such an interesting conversation to overhear, because I always think it's so interesting. Like, what do people value and how do they spend their money? And to see the difference of that some people just love to spend their money on material things, some people love to spend their money on traveling. And so it was just a very interesting conversation, perspective, all of that. And so I was kind of reflecting just on how my decisions of how I spend money have evolved lately. So I also, it also kind of resonated with me. Like, I was thinking as this guy was telling the $300 boot story, like, okay, how many times are you gonna wear those boots before like the next pair comes out, and then you got to get that pair, and then the next pair comes out, and you got to get that pair, and next thing you know, you spent $1,200 on boots, and you're only wearing one pair of them. And so I was also thinking about that in the sense of like, sometimes I'll buy material things and I'll be like, oh, that dress was kind of a waste of money. But I've never felt like I've wasted any money traveling. Like, I've never thought like, damn, that plane ticket I bought, that wasn't worth it. Or that excursion I did wasn't worth it. I've always thought like, oh my gosh, like, that was so much fun. What a great experience. And so that's one thing that I've really been trying to embrace lately, is to try to be less fixated on having material things, and instead to choose to spend my money and my time on things that are experiences and things that bring me joy instead. And so I, of course, I'm going to end this episode with a Pinterest quote. And so I recently decided that I wanted to start ending every episode with a Pinterest quote, because I have a whole Pinterest board for mental health that I love. And so I just wanted to share that with you guys. Okay, so the quote that came to mind whenever I was thinking about this episode, which was, really focused on material things versus experiences, how we spend money, and just how we kind of value that, is I've always thought the quote is so interesting, that talks about how we work jobs that we hate to buy houses we don't need, to impress people we don't even like. And I think that's always such an interesting quote, because I think it's another great example that people are always looking for the next job or the next thing or the next way to make money, and they don't care if they're happy doing it. They just care if they have it so they can look like they have the latest and greatest, to be keeping up with the Joneses. And so I just think it's a really good, maybe just time and perspective, just to reset and just to remember that you shouldn't be killing yourself to buy things you don't need to impress people you don't like. All right, so my closing thoughts are, buy the plane ticket. And so I wanted to do actually some tips on how I travel budget friendly and what that looks like. So my number one tip is budget. And so by that I mean, anytime I go on a trip, like, I've already saved the money for it. So the trip that I just went on, for example, I have a couple different point systems that I use to get a lot of my travel for free. I'll generally save it and use it all for one big trip. So the trip that I just went on, I used my credit card points for my plane ticket, and I used my Hilton Honors points for my hotels. So all I paid for was my rental car and whatever I did while I was there. And so I had been like budgeting and saving to make sure that I had the money for the things that I wanted to do while I was there. I've been saving my credit card points to make sure I could pay for the flights. But anytime that I go on a trip, I always make sure that I have all those pieces outlined, that I've always got the money to pay for it before I go, rather than going and then being like, oh shoot, well, I didn't really plan on like money for excursions, so I can't do anything while I'm gone, or whatever that looks like. My next tip that kind of follows into that one is sign up for rewards. So Hilton Honors, I think, is a great program that is literally for free, and you get points every time you stay. And I just do all my travel through Hilton now, between personal and work, and then it all goes to one account, and then I get points that I can use for free stays. So my closing little final tip is also to plan ahead. And so whenever I talk about budgeting, like, I don't decide like, oh yeah, next month I'm gonna go on a big trip, and so I need to start budgeting. I literally just have like a travel line in my budget, where every single month I put aside a little bit of money towards traveling. So whenever I do travel, I already have the money set aside, and it makes it a lot easier and more practical. So that's partially how I do it and how I keep up with it, so that way I always have a little fun set aside. So, hope you guys enjoyed this episode on material things versus experiences, how we spend money, and the phenomenon that is. I really enjoyed just sharing with you guys some things that I learned, some perspective, and how my perspective has evolved a little bit over the years. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you guys have any comments, drop them below, like, subscribe, send to a friend. And as always, happy healing, babes.